Welcome to another episode of Talking Impact. Today I'm joined by Joelle Tomlinson, who is a global news reporter and morning news anchor for the weather. She's done years of work in community broadcasting as well. Today we get into mental health, telling our stories, the importance of having the ability to see who we are in our past, our present, and our future, our own personal journeys with loss and mental health, and the hope that we have and the ability to bring out the best in everyone through and despite those tough things we face. Welcome to Talking Impact, your go-to podcast for exploring the powerful connection between mental health, education, and resilient youth. Join us as we uncover insights and stories that inspire classrooms, stronger minds, brighter futures, and a lasting impact in our society.
Yeah.
Yes. What does it mean?
So I'm not South African, obviously. I am African though, and I was looking for this word to like connect with my audience, and I wanted something that was acknowledgement. And the word is sawubona, and it's South African, so from the Zulu culture, and it means I see you. And I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. And then I looked more into it, and it's not just I see you, it's I see you, and by seeing you, I bring you into being. And it just struck me because all we want is to be acknowledged, right? And a South African woman came up to me after I said this up on the podium, and she had tears in her eyes. And she was saying, 2 days ago, I was on my knees and I was praying for a sign, and I just felt, lost. And I was saying, show me a sign, show me a sign. And then she's like, you walk up on the stage and you say my word, you say my culture. And she came up and she's like, can I educate you a bit more on it? And she's like, it's not just seeing you, it's also seeing the past versions of yourself, where you are now and where you're headed. And I was like, that's stunning.
I got chills.
Yeah. And she was from South Africa. So I just thanked her for even elaborating on what I had said, but it was a special moment.
No matter how tired both of us may be,
Yeah.
I gotta tell you that for months, talk about resilience, and resilience is a word that gets used all over the place in different ways, shapes and forms. But what we talk about, what we research is psychological resilience. And again, it's complicated. I can give people way too much, but when I talk about what does it look like? It looks like what you just said. It's the ability to make meaning out of your past and your present into your future.
Truly, and keep moving forward. Yeah.
So,
it was a nice
sawubona.
moment. Sawubona. Yeah, it's great. I know. I wish I could claim the word myself, but it was, and I was really looking for something from Africa. So it was from my roots too. And when it popped up, I was like, that done.
Yeah.
That's it. So yeah, it's a great word to learn.
Yeah. So, Joelle, thank you for coming.
so
It's great to
welcome.
see you, Joelle, for the audience, and we'll explain it more in the intro. Joelle, you're a journalist, and you've been doing it since 2 a.m. Many
Today.
years, obviously, but you've had a long day already, and excited.
Yeah, if there's bags under the eyes, I apologize. I thought you meant I've been doing it since 2 a.m., like a grand total of one day.
No.
No, yeah, it's up early this morning. Right now, I'm doing weather casting.
Yeah.
So it's for the morning show currently. That's going to change soon. But morning show wise, I've been doing morning shows for about 13 years. Yeah. I jumped into mornings at the start of my career, and I never left.
Yeah. And then you did a lot of community pieces. That's where we connected.
Yeah. So the way my career, I was hosting the morning show of the actually competitor station that I'm at now. I'm at Global News now. And when I started with Global, the job that was open was community reporter. And I was really attracted to that idea because as a morning news anchor, you try and see the community, but they come to you in the studio. First being able to go, I got to meet you and I got to see the studio of the person we were featuring. And it's really nice to place yourself into the atmosphere and the environment that they're describing to you in studio, but you can't always put those images, into fruition. So community stories, they just said, whatever you think community is, I got that freedom, which was really, really nice because everyone interprets it differently. For me, it was amplifying the stories that you don't always get to see in mainstream media. And for others, it could be something else. So I was there I did that job for about 16 months. And now I'm into weather. So you got to be nimble.
We'll get there. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're enjoying weather. Congrats, I guess, because you're back on the morning shows.
Yep.
When you were
Yeah.
thinking about journalism as a
Mhm.
career, is that where you wanted to be, kind of the anchor person or morning show
Yeah.
person?
Oh my gosh, always. I was like the child watching Oprah. I was born in the early 90s, 90 to be exact. And I remember growing up and seeing news hosts, seeing Oprah do their thing and host. And I was like, that's something I was very Gabby. That was my nickname, was Gabby. Thanks, Dad.
Shout
And
out to Gabby's in the
yeah,
house, my
yeah,
daughter's favorite.
exactly. Yeah, we all got fun nicknames, and mine was Gabby. And I would put on his suit, and we'd set up a table just like this, and we put the camcorder on the VHS, and I would do the news of the community, that is. So I'd be like, oh, the neighbors, they just opened their new pool, and it's Glenn's birthday down the way, and it was just this outlet that I had. So when people say, what did you want to be when you grew up? I was like, it's this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm one of the very few people I think can say I was, 5, 6 years old. I was like, I'm going to be on TV, I
Yeah.
think was, what it was. But I knew I wanted to tell stories. Um, and my career has allowed me to do that. So,
Love that.
mhm.
So tell me, like, 'cause a lot of people may not understand as a journalist what
Mhm.
the work required, the training
Right.
required, and then the daily prep. It's not
Yeah.
just that you have to get up at 2 a.m. There's a whole lot that goes into every story you tell, every show that you do.
Mhm.
How did your early experiences kind of give you some of those strengths that you now use on a day-to-day basis?
Ooh, like early experiences back into early
Yeah,
childhood.
growing
Yeah.
up,
Okay.
pick the ones that jump out to you.
Yeah. So, in my case, of course, it's getting up early. You mentioned the 2 a.m. Today was a bit of an anomaly. Typically, I'm up around 3:30. So get that extra 90 minutes. But, I would say being a curious individual was the preparation I needed to become a journalist. And if you think about kids, they're typically very curious. It's a trait that a lot of children do have. And I feel like we lose some of that when we get older. We're not as curious. Sometimes we lean into judgment, or sometimes we just believe we know the answer
Yeah.
already. But as kids, you don't know. You're an open book. You've got to learn. You've got your elders. You've got your peers. You've got your teammates. You've got your coaches. And the feedback that I've always had. I was an athlete growing up. I loved school. Was always Joelle's very coachable, which it's not something you want to brag about, but it was because I was curious about how to get better. I wanted to be the best at everything I could do, and I would always fall into these captain roles or leadership roles because I was curious about my teammates and I was curious about the people I was with. So that I would say is the number one quality that carried me through and has helped me as an adult, as a journalist. Not to say I don't have my moments, of weakness or thinking I know it
Yeah.
all, but I tend to question myself a lot when I think that I'm the smartest person in the room, or,
Great.
or you always have to kind of take a step back and look from a different lens. And I never lost that childlike curiosity. So that would be part of it. I also grew up in a very non-traditional household,
Go on.
which
How so?
yeah,
I love
it's
this.
it's it's a very unique family. So I think it set me up for just being again curious about other people's stories and how they grew up. So I was adopted from birth by two parents in Saskatchewan, and they had already adopted another baby named Stefan, and he was my older brother. And that was 9 months prior to me being adopted. So we were very close in age. Another thing to work into that is we're in the early 90s. My brother was Jamaican and I'm African, and my parents are white. And that wasn't that common
No.
back then.
Very blended family,
Very
but
blended
different than what
family.
you think of. Yeah.
Totally. But now you see it, right? Now you see it and nobody questions it, particularly, in younger generations. But we got questioned a lot at that time. How did this happen? I obviously am not white passing. My brother was very light skinned. But in my case in particular, I just got used to the looks. And then 5 years later, they had my little sister after being told they could not have children. So
Beautiful story.
it's a great family, right? And I'm really proud of the family dynamic, but it also brings with it a lot of stories, right? You've got my brother's story and his family, and all of these families were also based in the same region. So I had an open adoption. So I knew my birth mom, and my brother knew his birth father. And we worked that into our fabric. But that brings complications, that brings tough discussions, brings a whole lot of love. But I think it made me very aware that normal isn't a thing in my life, nor do I want it to be. And I think it made us really unique in our way of thinking and the way people interpreted who we were. I think there was judgment there, and it made me really determined to always ask the questions before making the assumption.
Good journalism trait.
Well,
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It served me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that, now I've gone on this rant. I can't even remember what the original question was.
It was about the skills, the strengths that you developed early on to get to where you are.
Yeah. So I think the empathy and the curiosity, I think those
Empathy
are
and
the
curiosity are
two.
fantastic. And that curiosity, I have a question because you're right. It's not something a lot of adults have. And it's something that even for myself, I have to relearn every time I do a podcast or when I walk
Same.
into a meeting. I have to remember to intentionally lean into the unknown versus pretending I know everything.
Yeah.
Where
It's
do you
hard.
think most people lose it?
Ooh, I think, and it's not a negative thing. I think as we get older, we start to protect ourselves. We get scared. I think a lot of it comes from fear of seeming like you don't know something, fear of not being perfect, fear of others that don't fall within maybe your beliefs or your culture. And we're raised that way. We're raised to be a little bit scared of the unknown. And I think we start to protect ourselves as we get older, and we kind of put the horse blinders on, right? So I don't think it's a negative thing per se. I think it's a societal thing. And once we find our safe spaces, we don't really want to like step out of the lines. So, but as a kid, they just, they want to go play in that sandbox. They want to talk to that kid. They want to try that experience. But we get more scared as we get older. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is just to like get past that fear and say hi to the person that you know nothing about. Ask somebody their story. Look someone in the eyes. We don't even do that anymore. And so that's in terms of when, I'd say as soon as we start get socially conditioned, right? So like high school.
Yeah.
I can remember even, remember when embarrassment became a thing, like grade 5, grade 6. I think it starts to creep in a little bit. That's my own personal experience, and that's what I think. But
I think it's important for young people to have mentors, parents, teachers that continue to help them lean into that, to not hide themselves behind their walls and heroes. We talk about circumstances, fears, and labels being these walls that can hide your strengths, your curiosity, your passion, your desire to help others, and your purpose. It's so important to have those people in your life that can pull out the best in you, who see the best in you, to the word we were talking about, and not just see it, but see that potential that's there and continue to draw it out. Were there key people in your life, teachers, or even more on your parents, how they helped be that guide for you to ensure that you weren't living from those walls, but were actually living from that core strength?
Mentors are so important. I don't know if we always recognize them in the moment. There's the classic traditional mentor when you go into a workplace and maybe you're paired with somebody. I mentioned the sports. I would say I had a lot of mentors and coaches. In line with growing up in the 90s in Saskatchewan, I also didn't fit in aesthetically with a lot of my peers. And I found that I had coaches that never made me feel othered, always made me feel really empowered, would pull me aside. So, there's a few people I can think of off the top of my head that really helped me just develop that leadership and that resilience. There were moments, um, you know, humanity reared its ugly head sometimes when I was younger, and it came through other children sometimes. And I can think of certain coaches, one of them, his name was Blair Schwarzenberger. He's unfortunately passed on. And he would always just kind of pull me aside and make me feel special and work with me on my face off. And I don't think I realized in those moments, it was more mentorship and not, hey, we're talking about a puck hitting the ice. We're actually working on your skills and your talent, and we're focusing in on what makes you special. So I have to give a shout out to all coaches out there, because you have a heavy job, fun job, but heavy. And I had a few teachers as well that really recognized this like burning passion for knowledge in me. And these teachers, I feel very fortunate. I feel very blessed. They were writing to my parents being like, hey, Joelle's got something with writing. Like, Joelle's very gregarious. Joelle distracts the class. But hey, like, this is something that, she could probably take advantage of. And how can we work with her? So I had a teacher in grade 2. Her name was Sharon Biss. And I think she's still teaching now in Saskatchewan. I'm not quite sure. But she recognized this kind of innate curiosity within me, and would give me extra tasks or let me do, be team leader and check in on my peers. And eventually, I was moved schools into a separate stream. At the time, it was called ACTEL. So it was just if you were, I think they're coded now as gifted. I think that was what I'm not entirely sure. I don't have children, but it really put me into like my happy space. Yeah. Yes, I found my niche. My best friend happened to be in the program with me, and I just think about the teachers who recognize that, and I also think about the kids who they didn't have that. They didn't have someone who like picked up on that and put them where they're most comfortable. And you got to give kudos to your parents too. My parents, I don't think raising 3 kids with 3 such different backgrounds is easy. There's the nature versus nurture argument that pops in. We're all very, very different. And I think they just let us be who we needed to be. Okay. I think they gave us a lot of space and a room to just embrace what we needed, make the mistakes, and kind of triumphantly go down our path, whether that be a path that led to some failure or success.
Sounds like they were aware, though. It wasn't abdication as a parent. It was listening and leaning into and encouraging the best of you to come out. And then to have a teacher work with a parent, I'm just drawing a little diagram here, because this is the ideal of supporting a young person to be a member of society, to be productive, to live from their strengths, to pursue a passion outside of themselves. Mm-hmm. It's so unique. And I think for anyone who might be listening, thinking about as a teacher or as a parent, how do I get this trifecta of parent and teacher working alongside student in a way that's not extra time or extra work for anybody, but it's really just finding what's best and helping bring it out to the point where you got into a special program that's now led to where you're at today. But let's start there, because I want to get to where you're at today, but there's more to go.
I feel really, really grateful for the adults that were in my life when I was a kid. I think sometimes, teachers they work so hard. And I think it's really hard to be a teacher right now in this current state and this current economy, and classes are overcrowded and teachers are just doing their best. And there's a lot of teacher burnout right now. So I want to acknowledge that before being like, it's so easy, find the light in the child and nurture it. I know it can be so hard. It's funny to say extra work, because I think when a teacher is really good at their job, maybe they're not even seeing it as extra. They're just, finding passion in seeing a kid that loves to be there and wants to learn from them and wants to take on that knowledge. I was fortunate because not only was it Mrs. Biss, it was the teacher next who then followed up on that. And I think the teachers were talking to each other, being like, hey, you've got this in Joelle, let's nurture it. Let's follow along. And it went all the way through high school. I had a teacher, I went to a public high school in Saskatoon, and he just wrote on my report card, he's like, I hope I'm reading your stories one day. And then he wrote, and I hope one day I can write like you. And I remembered, because I really admired this teacher, and it just struck me. And I sent him a note after I graduated and I got my degree in journalism. And I said, you may not remember this, Mr. Daw, but you said this to me in grade 10, and I have fulfilled my dream of becoming a journalist. And I want you to know you made a massive impact. And I encourage people to do that, because it feels good not just to say it, but you hope that they're feeling just as good receiving it.
That's the teacher every kid wants and needs. And every parent wants their kid to find that teacher who helps ignite that spark. Because as a parent alone, it's hard to do that all the time. And to actually, when your kids get to a certain age, they start believing what you believe in them and what you see, unless it's reaffirmed out there, which is why I think it's so important for not to work together to do more, but to recognize together as a teacher, as a mentor, as a coach, and a parent, to always be looking for how can we, I'm going to make up a term
Yeah.
here, positively triangulate this kid into
Ooh, I like
believing what
that.
we see in them, believing the
Yeah.
best.
Positively triangulate.
Yeah.
Sure you're not a journalist?
I did do it 1 year.
Hey,
I did
okay.
do it, and then I switched a few times, and here I am running a podcast
Hence
for
the curiosity,
charity.
right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I am curious about, because you do a lot. Like how we met was covering community, covering
Yep.
organizations that are doing work like ours to
Mhm.
support youth, to do intervention, early prevention work for mental health. And I know that you have a lot of passion for this area. Did that start early and often, or did that start at a certain point as you started to grow and learn and become more of who you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there was ever a point where I can say mental health became, something I was focusing on. I think it was thrust upon me because of my experiences. And then once I felt like I waded through a lot of loss and grief in my life. And once I came up for air and I started talking to people, I was like, oh my goodness, so many people are going through this and we're not talking to each other about it. And I went through loss early. I know we'll get into this discussion, but I was in my mid 20s when my brother did pass away, and I was a live reporter at the time. And live reporting. Wow, now I'm making up words. Live reporting in Saskatchewan at the time was what we call soft news. So you're doing, the fun stuff. I was skydiving out of a plane. I don't know if they'd allow that now, but we were pushing it. I'm covering the fun events. I'm at the hospital home lottery. I'm doing this and that. And after going through what I went through, I felt very passionate about also covering the stories that are very uncomfortable to speak about, and putting them into the public sphere, and not really apologizing for making people feel uncomfortable, because we all want this perfect facade of who we are, but nobody has that. And most people have a story to tell that's a little bit ugly and a little bit raw, and uncomfortable for not just them, but others. But how else do you fix things without acknowledging them, right?
On that, like your brother Stefan,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, if you're comfortable, can you
Mm-hmm.
share that not specific what happened, but
Mm-hmm.
how, like where he was, you were both adopted,
Mm-hmm.
similar age when you were adopted,
Yeah, he was 18 months older than me.
similar
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
experience. What
Yeah.
what was his journey like? That
Yeah.
how was it that mental health became such a so severe that it cost him his life and cost you your brother?
Yeah. It's always hard for me to look back, because I think sometimes you're like, where did it go awry? Where did I go wrong? Where did he go wrong? Both adopted from birth, both open adoptions, both with access to one of our birth parents, same parents. And I think that's something parents need to be kind to themselves too. Like, you cannot raise a child the exact same way and have them turn out the exact same way. My brother definitely struggled with his identity more than I did. Um, it's hard to look different. It's hard to not have the same background as everyone. And I always saw it in him, where there was this hustle to fit in. Um, and it broke my heart, honestly. Like, I didn't pick up on that until hindsight, where I really saw that, how hard he was working to be in with the cool crowd, or, um, act like nothing bothered him. He was a really tough, like big, brawly kind of guy. He was known for getting in fights on the football field and the hockey rink. So I think when you see someone that tough, and honestly just a bruiser, you don't really understand like how much hurt they can have inside. And I mean, as a teenager, I didn't see it or recognize it. I moved away pretty young. I moved away at 17. And Stefan and I were very close, like very, very tight knit. But me moving away also moved me away from recognizing the path he was taking. I heard some things were coming through the grapevine. And yeah, he started using drugs. He was selling drugs, and it's hard for me to even admit it now, but I was just mad. Like, I wasn't empathetic
Mhm.
or sympathetic. I was angry. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? And like, kind of how dare you? Like, look at the opportunities we've been given. And um, I do not like that about myself. Like, I look back and I'm like, how could I not understand that he needed a helping hand? He did not need judgment. Hence, curiosity over judgment.
Amen.
Yeah. And yeah, it just kept getting worse. It kept getting worse. I started to recognize it in just the way he was looking, acting, some run ins with the law, some incarceration time, and just this loss of his sense of self. Um, and it was tough. I remember being on the morning show in Saskatchewan and getting texts at 5 in the morning from his roommate saying, "We can't find your brother. It's -40 outside. Do you have any idea? Have you heard from him?" And then I would go to my news director at the time and say, I need to go drive around Saskatoon. I just need to just look. And and thankfully at those times I always got the news that he was okay. And um I didn't tell anyone. So, my news director was aware because sometimes I'd have to step away.
Mhm.
My best friends did not know what I was going through. I didn't know exactly what my parents were going through. They didn't know what I was going through. There was no talking happening um, because of keeping up that facade, right? And uh, yeah, it makes me really sad to think about how alone he must have felt during all of that as well. It makes me really emotional to think about how alone he felt and how I didn't step up as his sister and as a sibling should. There are boundaries to talk about, and obviously he wasn't. I always look back and I'm like, that wasn't entirely my brother. That was somebody who, drugs had taken over, bits of his personality were gone, pieces of his childhood like he were seemed to be missing. And he did end up going to jail, and he got clean,
Mhm.
and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And I saw pieces of my brother again, and he gained back all this weight, and he just looked healthy. And he decided to go to a program at the college there. I can't for carpentry,
Yeah.
and he was living with my cousin's uncle. Complicated, but
Yeah.
my cousin's uncle. Because it wasn't quite right for him to live with either me, who I was living on my own, or my parents, where my sister was living at the time. And yeah, he went out one night with his friends. He took Oxycontin, what he thought was Oxycontin, with his buddies, and he went home and he passed away in his sleep. And yeah, I'll never forget that phone call. I got a call from my dad. I missed it. I was on a separate call at the time, and then he called again.
Mhm.
And for some reason, I knew like something was wrong. My dad doesn't call often. He's a man of very few words. Over the phone, you wait 10 days for a text back. Uh, I hung up on the person that I was chatting with, and I called him back, and he just said, "Sweetheart, your brother's dead." And I didn't actually believe him. I I actually said, "What?" And he repeated it, and I started screaming. I don't remember much from there. I know the phone dropped. I know I dropped. And he said, "Stay there. I'm coming."
Mhm.
And I just laid on the ground until my best friend, her dad, and my dad showed up. And yeah, it was the worst thing that has ever happened to me or my family. And I can't see anything worse happening beyond that. It's still, that was almost exactly 10 years ago today. And it still sits with me every single day. And when I look back, I recognize his almost insurmountable mental health issues. I recognize he was leaning on drugs to make him feel better. I also recognize that he was getting better. And this drug, which is now such a common word,
Mhm.
we didn't even know what fentanyl was at that time. He was one of the first handful of people to die in Western Canada from it. And then as a reporter, I had to cover that story from there on in, and just, where we are today. We haven't stemmed it at all.
I remember that time, and Jordan Rempel, who's my program director and partner in doing good in this world, we were running a youth program for homeless and addicted kids at that time, and had been running it for 3 years at that point.
Wow.
Huge, great success rate, about 70% long-term aftercare, still committed to sobriety. And 2015 came, and second chances disappeared.
It's a horrible, horrible drug. I recognize its use in a medical supervised setting, but it's horrendous. If I have any anger left in my body, it's towards anyone that would cut that into another drug, knowing full well how little of it is needed. And thank goodness for some of, the Narcan kits that we have now. Those didn't exist. My brother didn't have a chance, and neither did these kids, right, who may have. 2015 was a really bad year for that.
Yes, it was.
And we were, not only that, people were questioning and judging people when they had no idea the severity of this drug. The first thing they told us was suicide. And it was my mom who was like, nope, absolutely not. That's not where he was at. So we did get the autopsy. And they tested the pill that was on his bedside table, and it was completely fentanyl. So, he didn't stand a chance. His second chance was happening and unraveling in front of me, and it absolutely crushes me to know that it was just gone like that.
I struggle with how difficult it is for I think mainstream to understand how parallel this is to any learning journey. That you don't just get something once because you failed and now it's okay, I'll be perfect from there.
Yes.
From swimming lessons to journalism.
Yeah.
It's a lot of trial and error. And when you're struggling with mental health, which is a chronic, lifelong journey, and there's addiction at the table, there's so much out of their control in that situation. And it requires that continued forward. Even if you get knocked down, getting back up is the only way to persevere, is the only way to make it into a long-term sobriety situation. And
right.
I think we fail to understand how, not just how addiction works, but how sobriety looks and how it happens, because it's not, oh, I'll never do that again.
And here I am, and I'm a perfect functioning citizen of the world. Yeah, I agree. And we don't have compassion.
Yeah.
I have seen compassion, and I'm in the right circles, so I see it a lot. But we do not treat people with addiction and mental health issues the same as we would treat somebody who was diagnosed with something terminal, with, someone who breaks a bone and you can see their arm is in a cast, right? We hear that all the time. You do not know what people are going through. And to me, obviously, I've been through it, so I have a bit of a different lens, but we need to treat these people with respect and compassion, and firm compassion at times. Obviously, this isn't, us saying it's okay. You do not have to condone what's happening, but you have to help. You have to understand what's happening. And if we're going to give compassion to, anyone who's had something thrust upon them that they didn't expect, do we really think anyone struggling with an addiction expected this to happen? Or a mental health issue? Nobody asked for that. So I find myself, I run quite a bit, and I run the Bow River in Calgary, and I'm seeing what's going on, and my heart is breaking because I'm seeing more and more people and experiencing homelessness along those pathways. And what I did notice after going through what I went through, I'm always like, what is your story? Like, how did we get here? Where are your parents? Or maybe where are your kids? I've covered a lot of stories where they talk about their children and they're living on the street. They're living in their car. And a lot of it is mental health.
Yeah.
And
is that the common thread?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A lot of it is mental health. They've, maybe something happened. They had a job and there was a job loss. Well, most people are living paycheck to paycheck right now. So what happens then? They lose their home. Well, that's not good on your mental health either. And if you're already struggling, that plunges you into, okay, now you're living in your car. You can't take care of your children. You don't want to reach out. I interviewed a woman who had a dog and couldn't find anywhere that accepted her dog. So she chose to live out in Calgary winter on the streets. And she had contemplated, taking her own life numerous times and was sticking around because she had her dog. And I covered her story and I was trying not to cry the whole time I was interviewing her because she said that some people are just so dismissive to her. And it's not being mean, it's literally not even looking at her like a human. And I think I have some guilt associated with that because it brings me back to my own personal experience.
Well, there's a biography on Leonardo da Vinci called The Agony and the Ecstasy.
Oh, I haven't watched it.
Speaks to the premise. We see this in art, we see this in literature, we see this in history, we see it in a lot of biography, is where our biggest pain point is if we lean into it, if we really lean into and be curious around what's broken our heart, that's where our passion and our purpose comes from. And
that's good. I like that.
so often in life, we don't have the supports. We don't have the awareness or even the understanding that that's how we get through the tough stuff. And then the only other option is to numb it out in any way, shape, or form.
Yes.
And it's when we do that the mental health starts to stack and the addiction starts to stack, and that downward spiral and that trap of addiction and homelessness, they go hand in hand. And mental health is the third part of that very negative triangle.
And it's interesting you say numbing it out because, some people choose drugs, which can be absolutely disastrous. Some people choose Netflix.
Work.
In my case, at times it was fitness. But we somehow as a society decide which numbing factor.
Positive, but I can see how it can go.
Exactly. Yeah. And we like to decide which one is suitable and which one is not. And I agree with that. I think a lot of us numb out without knowing what our mechanisms are because we just don't want to deal with the thing, which, to your point, is sometimes pain. Or, maybe it's something you need to do and it's procrastination. But I worry about that with our society. I truly do. The scrolling and the getting lost in things and this next generation coming up, just growing up in a world of A, perfection, but B, relentless social media.
Yeah.
You work with kids, I don't, but
huge. Yeah.
It makes me nervous.
And I keep coming back to this because I get asked about it all the time. And yes, it's a negative piece to the puzzle, but I would say the underlying epidemic underneath the social media, underneath the anxiety and depression, underneath the addiction is an epidemic of hopelessness.
Oh, yeah.
And that the effect you see on a young person when they're depressed and anxious and they start to talk about how social media can be that numbing out, but then also is that reinforcement that you're not good enough. You use the term fitness.
Yeah.
And it implies this idea of I'm not fit enough or I need to be more fit. And you have an outlet. Those of us who are exercising, trying to become better, we have a passion, we want to put it into action, we want to become better than we are.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're just sitting there doom scrolling, there's a reason why it's called doom scrolling, because it's taking away that hope, using comparison by way of showing people's highlight reels.
Yes, and I'm guilty of that.
It continues to show us that we're not good enough. I'm not this person. I'm not that person. And especially for the young mind, it
Right. And what is it? We're not done developing our brains until 25, something like that. So I imagine you're taking in this overwhelming amount of information at such a young age. I constantly am grateful that social media was not a thing when I was in high school. It was just becoming a thing when I graduated high school. And I don't think I could have handled it. I am a comparison person and I recognize it and I walk away from it. But my natural instinct is to be how can I be better? How can I match up to that person? How do I write like that person? How do I look like that person? Social media. It's funny. People always bug me that I'm not on TikTok and I'm a public figure. And how are you not on TikTok yet? And I'm I'm scared of another thing.
Right. Another thing to put myself out there to say I'm okay.
Yes.
So often our whole litmus test on our own value. And this is where it comes back to that whole hope deficit is our value, if it's predicated on how other people perceive us and what other people judge us for and how high they hold us up, can become that sinking sand, because it's so often just predicated on us doing more, doing more, doing more. So then when the bottom falls out, we lose our job, we lose our house, we lose our relationship, who we are
Yep. That's a great
goes
point.
away with it. And there's nothing left to hope for.
Yeah. I mean, and it can seem dark. I mean, the good news is like, you are who you hang with. You can find it in your peers. I was just at some incredible female empowerment conferences, and I spoke to Ashley Collingbull. I don't know if you know her name, but she was the first Indigenous Miss Universe Canada. She competed on The Amazing Race. She was the first Indigenous Sports Illustrated model. And she comes from the Enoch Reserve and from a history of abuse and of feeling left out. And here I am, the journalist. I'm like, how? Like, how do you walk into a room with such confidence? Like, you come from so little, in her own words, and she's just achieved so much. And she said, you are who you hang with, truly. Like, you are the sum of the people you're around. And secondly, she's like, people's opinions are not my business. And it stuck with me because I'm like, why do we care so much about other people's opinions? And it ties into that hopelessness, right? Because we're comparing and we want to be this for this person. And she just had this air about her, which I'm sure did not come easily or naturally, but it was like, I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to put it out there and take it or leave it. But this is who I am. And these are my values. And I want to leave a legacy. And I'm here for more than myself. And it inspired me. That's why I love what I do. Because I walked home and I was like, I learned something new today.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so tied to what like your passion is, social justice and advocating for other women and for, equity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And I'm curious around that, like at the heart of not just the journalist Joelle, not just the platform Joelle, but if that was to go away, I see someone who has a passion that would continue and remain, even if it was just one person at a time.
Yeah.
If you could kind of distill that heart down to a few words or to a story, what would you say that purpose, that passion that you have deep down inside is?
Distill it down to a few words. If I could bring it down to a short story,
Yeah.
Gabby, remember? I didn't speak about my experience for a very long time. I didn't want people to know that about me. And I shared my story on stage at a fundraiser that was advocating for unhoused people and people with mental health situations in Calgary. And a young girl came up to me afterwards, and she had tears in her eyes. And she had just lost her brother to a fentanyl overdose. And she just said to me, thank you. I never would have imagined someone like you could understand what someone like me goes through. And it struck me. I've had a lot of people come up and thank me for sharing my story, but to see, like, she must have been a teenager. She was going through it. We connected after on social media. And I think if I had to talk about my purpose, it would be to make people feel like they're not alone. I really feel like that's my purpose. Like, you're not alone. There are people who want to listen to you. You are worth it. You are valued, and your story is important. And that is at essence who I strive to be. I don't always hit the nail on the head, but I'm a good listener.
Yeah. I love that. It rhymes so well with, we do this thing called the fear fight.
Oh,
with
sounds
teachers,
scary.
with parents, with youth. It's actually a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And they write their fears down on a piece of paper, some big, some small. The whole goal of it, though, is not to extinguish fear because, well, there's scary stuff.
Yeah.
As soon as we wake up, sometimes before we wake up.
Totally.
But it's to help every young person, every parent, every teacher understand that they're not alone in their fear.
There it is. Like, everyone's scared of something. Some people are scared. You could be listening to somebody who makes $100K to talk to people on stages in that one setting, and they are terrified, but they're tackling it. And they've been through it. And I think that's the most human thing of all, is to connect us through our values and our fears and our dreams and our curiosity. And I think for so long I wasn't being authentic. And by not being authentic, I wasn't allowing other people to be themselves. I wasn't giving myself permission and I wasn't giving them permission. And I've worked really hard to build up my career. I've worked really hard to build up an image, a brand. And I think people need to know the cracks, the so-called cracks in that brand to make you more human and more accessible. And you never know like what your story will do for somebody. Just today, I shared on my social media a comment I received about my hair.
It's very nice, by the way.
Well, thank you. And, it wasn't a terrible comment, but I kind of made a joke about it. And the amount of mixed women who got back to me, one of them, it stuck with me and it said, this comment just hurts my inner child because I have been so scared to get braids as a biracial Black woman because I'm scared of the racism.
I'm not enough.
Yeah. I'm scared what will happen. I'm not enough. And I just wrote back to her, first of all, you're a queen. I went and obviously looked at her Instagram and I said, that's okay to be scared. I was really scared too. I've never seen braids on this television station. I've never seen braids on TV in Calgary to my own personal knowledge. And I said, I was really scared too. I'm like, but now I love them. I've stepped into it. And I posted the comment and I posted a little joke being like, well, I actually love them. So, it's just taking that power back and sharing that you're human, and then seeing your impact on other people. And she impacted me. And whatever journey that she's on, I hope that she looks back and says, okay, well, Joelle was scared and did it too. So I can do it.
I think my biggest takeaway today, Joelle, is curiosity is the antidote to judgment. Because judgment and fear, that's why we don't let our gifts shine. That's why we don't take those bold actions knowing that this is something that I really want. This is something I'm really good at, but I'm afraid. And we condition ourselves. We are conditioned so often by the world around us to listen to the fear and then try to get it to be quieter just by following in line sometimes, just by living a life of, quietness and not putting yourself out there, or worst case scenario, addiction and mental health and continuing to lash out and rebel. But curiosity, overcoming judgment. I don't need to know it all, but I do want to put myself out there in a safe enough way that helps me to explore the things that I'm passionate about. That's what I've learned today from you. So thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one last question before we wrap up. Also get your socials and websites so people can find you.
But
within the mental health, it's so complicated. Like, mental health, there's a system, there's a person, there's a family, there's all these pieces. But as a journalist, I'm super curious. What's the one thing around mental health that we're not talking about enough?
Oh, that's a great question.
That we need to talk about more, that we need to be more curious about.
I mean, I think it comes back to the personal. Once again, I think we keep covering mental health in a very overarching view. We keep looking at the systems, we keep looking at the numbers, and we don't distill it down to the people. My goal and what I hoped to do as community reporter was to take a big issue, like say, being unhoused or drugs and addictions or violence in someone's house, bringing it down to a character. You really want to find that character that people can relate to, because once people relate, they care. Once people can see themselves in the situation, they can't help but care. Or maybe it's a best friend in that situation, they care. So I don't feel like I can solve a mental health crisis as a journalist, but I can take the big issue and bring it down and let it come through the voice of one person. And I think it's our duty as journalists to make people care about the stories that matter. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of like what we're not talking about enough, because, oh gosh, mental health, like, first of all, we all have mental health. If you breathe, you have mental health. Mental illness, which we're not as understanding about, we need to see the human side of it. And people are scared of that side, and people aren't willing to dive into that. So I like to, comb through my peer network and find somebody who's willing, first of all, to speak about it, and ups to people who talk about their struggles. To journalists, thank you to them. If you've ever done so, we appreciate it. And any journalist worth their salt will guard your story like it's their own story. Like, you should see us writing and editing. I honestly get into a tizzy writing these stories because I just want to make sure that I tell it right. And you've trusted me with it, right? So now it's my turn to amplify your voice and hopefully make somebody donate money, look into the situation, call a friend, recognize something in yourself, and care. I walk past somebody, along the pathway and care. And I think when it comes to local journalism in particular and community reporting, I took that very, very seriously. And I know many of my peers and colleagues do too.
I love this.
Yeah.
Full circle for me is like, we got the story by making sure that we get the story. That's at the heart of it all.
Yeah.
It goes back to the word I'm going to butcher here. Maybe you can say it for me. Is Samubena?
Saubana.
Saubana.
You're right. And it may seem like a simple answer, right? Like getting the story, but how many times do you hear a news anchor talking about overdose numbers, and it's numbers and facts in the government, and here's the impact, and this is the 1,600.
Someone should do something about that.
Yes.
Is how we go to.
Yes. But the minute you see somebody who's been impacted, it might get you off the couch. And that's just my philosophy as a journalist.
Get the story, get in the story.
Mhm.
Don't just talk about it.
Yeah.
Do something about it.
Yeah.
We can't if we just see it as a big out there problem.
Right. And if you're just, in your own zone, and I understand that. I mean, we're in a almost post-COVID world, and I know times have been tough. Economically, times are tough. Everyone is just treading water right now. But if we don't care about each other, we're all going to drown collectively. Honestly, it's a morbid way to put it, but I really believe that without, holding the hands and pulling people through the door and whatever it may be, like, that's what community is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the hope I think we
That's
both
the
share
hope.
is that is
Yeah.
when we actually invest in the story rather than the stats and what's going on outside of our control,
Yeah.
we can actually turn this
Yeah.
thing around. Those stories
Yeah.
are like yours, stories that I could share are heart-wrenching at the same time. We
Mhm.
both still get up every day, not just to pay the bills, but we're
Right.
both in career paths that we chose because we wanted to provide hope for others, to
Mhm.
tell a different story, to change the narrative. Where do you see that in our world? What stories and what maybe organizations that you're familiar with are doing
Mhm.
that work to take it from mental illness to optimal mental well-being, one person at a time?
Yeah, there's a lot of great organizations in Calgary. You have Skipping Stone, you have Mustard Seed, you have the YMCA and YWCA. You have a lot of organizations. You've got Safe Haven, which is helping young women who are experiencing and perhaps being unhoused, and they sponsor them, and they're going to school and they're working. So many organizations. But what I will say with that is, we talked about the heart-wrenching stories, and we talked about how tough it can be for people. And you do have to make people care that way, but you have to instill hope in people as well. So a lot of these stories, and I've talked about this with a lot of marginalized groups as well, is don't just talk about the tough stuff. We have to talk about the celebration too.
Mhm.
And like celebrating the resilience and celebrating the person that did this and celebrating the organization that got somebody out of the darkness. And when you tell those stories, it's like any classic trope, right? We want to see like the beginning. We want to see them hit an obstacle. We want the climax of the story and the denouement, if I can nerd out for a minute. But there's always that you want to see the protagonist succeed. So if you tell those stories and show the hope and show that there is that light at the end of the tunnel, people want to be a part of that momentum too. It's like a great sports story, right? You want to get up
Absolutely.
and cheer for these people. So not just showing that it's really, really hard and it's really tough, and your heart should go out to these people, but also that like there is that moment of hope and gratitude and resilience and almost that hero, to use your
Absolutely.
community's impact within these people, and you can be a part of that story. So
I love
Yeah.
it. And it's more than, I do appreciate the acronym Hold On, Pain Ends for Hope. And at
Mm-hmm.
times that's the most we can do. That's grit, but resilience, what we're talking about of
Mm-hmm.
seeing our past and our present and our future is more
Yep.
than just hope. It's belief.
Yeah. Faith.
It's
Yeah.
knowing that despite this, I am so much more and there's so
Mhm.
much more beyond this.
Absolutely. And eh, to be completely honest, question every day where I'm headed. But I do have this really strong belief that like the best days are coming. And not just for myself, for anyone listening, and maybe questioning themselves right now. Like there are better days ahead. And I think that's a storyteller's job
Yeah.
as well, right? You know, it's not just a journalist, it's all storytellers. And by the way, we are all storytellers.
Absolutely.
People always say that to
That's
me.
the
Yeah,
human differential.
it really is. And
We're
it comes
meaning making
from,
machines.
yep,
Oh,
we are. So, yeah, you can tell I love hearing from people. So, and love hearing their, not just their struggles, but their triumphs.
there's so much to take away from this, Joelle,
Yeah.
and I really kind of think it all is encapsulated in hope. And to
Hmm.
know that not just have hope that it will end, that's not real hope. I think it's
No,
that understanding that because of our past and our present, there is a future, despite what we may be facing.
absolutely. Just had one of my best friends pass away this past summer, and she always said to me, "Joe, find the good,
Mm.
find the good." And I have it now up in my entryway, and I
Find the good.
find the good, and I do. Like, as a journalist, as a person, as a wife, a sister. I really do think we as a society need to find the good, not just in people, but in situations. And that's another story that could be heart-wrenching and sad, and it is. Um, but I have this like relentless faith that came out of it. So, everyone has their barriers that they're up against, and I think we need to come together, and tell our stories and make sure we don't feel alone. Recognize that times can be tough, and also recognize that like times can be pretty magical too.
And we don't get to that magic without facing the tough. Every hero's
Exactly.
journey, there's a
Hmm.
belly of the whale, there's a low,
Yes.
and that's where they find the gift.
Yep.
So thank you for sharing yours with us
You're
today.
welcome. Thank
Joelle
you.
Tomlinson will definitely be seeing more from you
I
and
hope so.
excited to see your story unravel. And
Yeah.
thank you for supporting ours as we grow our impact on
Mhm.
youth and helping them build their strengths and build their
Yeah.
story into their future.
And thank you for what you do. It's huge. You're getting, the kids at a time when they're very vulnerable and open to it. So you're changing lives.
And more of that positive
Yeah.
triangulation to come. So thank you.
You're welcome.